Story 1: The Cursed Whales of Death Valley. Deep within the arid borders of California and Nevada lies Death Valley, a name that stirs an eerie chill in the hearts of those who hear it. Known for its scorching heat, vast stretches of barren desert, and surreal landscapes, this place hides more than just natural wonders. Beneath its shifting sands rests a tale so sinister that even the winds seem to whisper its cursed echoes. In the blistering summer of 1937, 4 explorers, Jack, Henry, Lucy, and Frank, embarked on a daring expedition to uncover the fabled Silent City, an ancient settlement rumored to be buried somewhere deep within Death Valley. Legends spoke of a city once rich and thriving, cursed into oblivion, swallowed whole by the unforgiving desert. Its very existence was considered a myth, but to Jack, it was a treasure waiting to be found. Their journey began with excitement, fueled by maps scrawled with cryptic symbols and tales passed down through hushed voices. Days melted into nights as they trudged through the endless sea of sand. But when darkness fell, the desert transformed. The oppressive silence grew heavier, interrupted only by the faint, distant sound of something or someone weeping. At first, they blamed exhaustion, but soon, strange footprints appeared in the sand, large, misshapen, and unlike any creature known. Their tents would tremble slightly even when the air was still. Whispers floated on the night breeze, though no soul was near. One night, Frank awoke to the feeling of being watched. He peered outside his tent and froze. A shadow stood in the moonlight, not cast by any living being. Its eyes glowed faintly red, its shape shifting like smoke, featureless yet horrifying. Frank's scream jolted the others awake, but by the time they rushed outside, the figure had vanished, leaving only a faint, acrid smell lingering in the air. The next day, they stumbled upon what appeared to be the ruins of an ancient city, partially buried under dunes that had hidden it for centuries. Strange symbols were etched into crumbling stones, and towering above them was a stone archway with an ominous inscription: "Who awakens the forgotten shall never find rest again." Henry wanted to turn back. Fear clung to him like the desert heat. But Jack, driven by greed or perhaps something darker, refused to leave. They ventured deeper into the ruins, eventually finding a subterranean chamber sealed by a massive stone door. Carved into it were grotesque images, figures sinking into the sand, their faces twisted in eternal agony, while shadowy entities loomed above them, grinning. Ignoring Henry's protests, Jack forced the door open. Inside lay a stone box, ancient and covered in strange markings. As he pried it open, a sudden gust of icy wind erupted from within, extinguishing their lanterns. A black, smoky figure slithered out of the box and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind an oppressive silence. That night, Henry disappeared. His terrified screams echoed through the ruins, but no matter how desperately they searched, they found only deep, unnatural drag marks in the sand, leading nowhere. Panic set in. Lucy and Frank begged Jack to leave, but he was beyond reason, obsessed with uncovering more secrets. The following morning, Jack was gone too. His tent was torn apart, stained with dark, dried blood. No tracks, no struggle, just a lingering shadow cast unnaturally against the rising sun. Lucy and Frank, gripped by fear, fled into the unforgiving desert. Days passed in a blur of heat and hallucination, but the darkness followed them. One night, Frank vanished just as Henry had, his final screams swallowed by the endless dunes. Lucy was the only one to make it back. She was found wandering near the outskirts of the valley, dehydrated, sunburned, and silent. She never spoke again. Her wide, hollow eyes told a story no words could capture. Decades have passed since that doomed expedition, but Death Valley has not forgotten. Hikers still report hearing faint cries carried on the wind, seeing shadows move against the grain of the moonlight, and finding strange footprints where no man or beast should have walked. Some even claim to have seen figures standing in the distance, vanishing when approached, leaving behind only the faint scent of something ancient and foul. If you ever find yourself in Death Valley, remember, not all mysteries are meant to be solved. If you hear the distant sound of weeping at night, do not follow it. For it may not be the wind, it may be the cursed souls of the silent city, forever trapped between the sands and the shadows. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Story 2. The Whispering Curse of Death Valley. Death Valley, a vast, desolate expanse where the sun scorches bones to dust and the air carries the faint scent of ancient secrets. People call it the Valley of Death. But the true horror behind that name is a story few have lived to tell. This place isn't just barren, it's alive with something unseen, something that watches when you think you're alone. In the summer of 2013, a group of thrill-seeking vloggers ventured into Death Valley to shoot a documentary. The leader was Mark Hamilton, accompanied by his friends Sarah, Jake, and Linda. They weren't just looking for breathtaking landscapes, they wanted to capture something that would send chills down their audience's spine. But what they found was far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. At the heart of Death Valley lies a place known as Racetrack Playa. Here, large stones mysteriously move on their own, leaving long trails etched in the dry ground. No one has ever seen them move. Scientists have offered explanations: wind, ice, shifting soil, but none of them fully make sense. Mark's team decided they'd camp there overnight, convinced that if they captured the stones in motion, their video would go viral. On the first night, strange things began to happen. Through the lens of their cameras, they could see the rocks shifting ever so slightly, dragging across the cracked earth. But when they looked with their own eyes, nothing moved. Jake joked nervously, maybe it's ghosts pushing them, trying to lighten the mood. But the truth was far darker than a simple ghost story. As night deepened, the air grew unnervingly still, heavy with an oppressive silence. Then faint whispers began to drift through the wind, soft, unintelligible voices, not in any language they recognized. The voices weren't coming from around them. They were inside their heads. Sarah's demeanor changed first. Her eyes grew distant, as if she were listening to something far away. Suddenly, she whispered, "They're calling me." Before anyone could react, she bolted into the darkness, chasing an invisible voice. Mark, Jake, and Linda grabbed their flashlights and followed, screaming her name. But Sarah was gone. All they found were her footprints in the dry soil, which stopped abruptly, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away. Just gone. Panic set in. The group decided to abandon the documentary and leave, but every direction they walked, they found themselves circling back to the same spot, Racetrack Playa. The landscape had become a labyrinth, shifting subtly when they weren't looking. The mountains in the distance seemed to move, and the stars above twisted into unfamiliar patterns. By the next morning, Linda was gone too. No screams, no struggle, just an empty sleeping bag and strange symbols drawn in the dust where she had been. Jake broke down, trembling with fear. Mark tried to keep them grounded, convincing Jake they'd find a way out. But deep inside, he felt it too. This wasn't a place you could escape. That night, Jake recorded a final message on his camera. "This isn't just a desert, it's alive. We've seen things, heard things that don't belong in this world. Sarah and Linda, they didn't just disappear. Something took them. Something ancient. Something that doesn't want us to leave. If anyone finds this, don't come here. Don't listen to the whispers." Weeks later, a search party found their abandoned campsite. There were no bodies, no gear, just Jake's camera lying half-buried in the dust. The strangest part, the battery was still fully charged, as if it had never drained. In the final seconds of the footage, the screen flickers. A distorted face flashes for just a moment, not quite human, with hollow, stretched features and eyes too large for its skull. It stares directly into the camera. Then a faint whisper fills the speakers. Will you join us too? Death Valley still waits, its secrets buried beneath the sands. And if you ever find yourself there, far from civilization, and you hear the faint sound of voices calling your name, don't look back, because maybe they're calling for you. Story 3: Shadows Beneath Death Valley. They say Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth, but the real danger isn't the sun. It's what lives in the darkness, the things that don't cast shadows because they are shadows. In 2018, a team of geologists led by Dr. Evelyn Moore ventured deep into an unexplored region of Death Valley. Their mission was to study unusual seismic activity, tremors that had no logical source. With her were Tom, the tech specialist, Laura, the geophysicist, and Ben, the guide familiar with the harsh desert terrain. As they set up camp near an isolated canyon known as the Hollow, Ben warned them about local legends. The native tribes spoke of the Hollow Ones, ancient beings that thrived beneath the sands, older than time itself. Creatures that devoured not just bodies, but souls. Evelyn dismissed it as superstition, laughing it off. She believed in data, not ghost stories. But that night, the desert proved her wrong. The team was gathered around a small fire, reviewing seismic readings. Suddenly, Tom's equipment picked up a low-frequency hum, a vibration beneath the earth, like something enormous moving far below. Then came the sound, faint at first, like distant chanting. The fire flickered unnaturally, casting twisted shadows that didn't match their movements. Ben stood abruptly, his face pale. "This isn't the wind," he whispered. Moments later, Laura screamed. The ground beneath her caved in as if something had pulled her from below. Evelyn and Tom scrambled to the edge of the sinkhole, but Laura was gone. No trace, no body, just a hollow darkness that seemed deeper than the earth itself. Panic set in. They grabbed their gear, trying to flee, but the landscape around them had changed. Landmarks they'd passed hours ago were gone, replaced by endless dunes that seemed to shift when they weren't looking. The GPS malfunctioned, spinning wildly as if they were nowhere. As night deepened, the temperature dropped unnaturally. Death Valley, notorious for its scorching heat, became freezing cold. That's when they saw the first shadow, tall, thin, and impossibly dark, standing against the night sky. It wasn't cast by anything. It simply existed. Ben tried to shoot it, but the bullet passed through harmlessly. The shadow didn't react. It just grew larger, stretching toward him. In seconds, it enveloped him entirely. When the darkness faded, Ben was gone. His gear, his footprints, even the indentation where he'd stood, erased as if he'd never been there. Evelyn and Tom ran blindly into the night, their flashlights flickering. They found shelter in an old, abandoned mining tunnel carved into the rocks decades ago. Inside, the walls were covered in symbols, scratches that looked too precise to be random, resembling figures of people, all missing their shadows. Tom, breathing heavily, muttered, "They don't want us to leave." That's when the tunnel went silent. No echoes, no breathing, just an oppressive void. Evelyn turned to Tom, but he was frozen, his eyes wide with terror, mouth agape in a silent scream. Then, like smoke in the wind, he dissolved, his body collapsing into ash, leaving only his shadow burned into the ground, still frozen in that terrified pose. Evelyn was alone. She tried to escape, running until her legs gave out, but Death Valley had no intention of letting her go. She collapsed just as dawn approached, the rising sun casting long shadows across the sands, except for one thing. Evelyn had no shadow. Weeks later, a rescue team found the camp, perfectly intact but abandoned. The only clue was a single recording left on Tom's equipment, Evelyn's voice whispering over and over. "The Hollow Ones are here. They live beneath the sand, and they're hungry. If you ever find yourself in Death Valley and notice that your shadow looks strange, or worse, that it's missing entirely, don't bother running. They've already found you."